session we have is a fireside chat. Cloud community and open source, building a scalable tech stack for your high growth startup. The digital adoption rate of business in Southeast Asia has definitely sped up by a few knots thanks to the pandemic. And find the right cloud solution provider is critical to ensure that the right tech foundation and infrastructure are in place for long-term agility, scalability, cost effectiveness, and growth. Sitting with Gabe, Chief Product Officer of DigitalOcean, we will be given the chance to understand the importance of getting the cloud fundamentals along with insight to some of the best practices and key considerations when building one set of technologies. So the key speakers are Gabe Monroy, Chief Product Officer of DigitalOcean, and Prayaank Gupta, who is the Moderator, Vice President of Growth and Innovation at Precious Communications. Take it away, gentlemen. The stage is all yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Lenora. And now that you mentioned it, thank God it's Friday indeed. To all our guests tuning in, whether whichever part of the world you're in, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you. We're here for the session today, cloud community and open source, building a scalable tech stack for your high growth startup, particularly with Southeast Asia's digital economy set to hit $1 trillion by 2030. For those of you who saw the Google Temasek research that just came out yesterday, it's a very interesting time for us to talk with the likes of Gabe Monroy, who's the Chief Product Officer at DigitalOcean, to hopefully pick his brains and get his insights around how startups can become scale-ups in Southeast Asia. I'm your moderator, Prayaank Gupta. Precious Communications is a PR agency. We help all kinds of brands from startups, scale-ups, VCs, investors to enterprises and consumer brands to go to market in Southeast Asia or to take Southeast Asia innovation global. A lot of it recently has been through SPACs and IPOs, and that's what we do. We help get you featured and make you visible. I'm here with Gabe Monroy. Gabe, over to you. Tell us a bit about yourself and the record year that DigitalOcean is having.
Sure. Yeah. And first of all, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. So yeah, I oversee product and sort of the company's product vision over at DigitalOcean. Prior to DigitalOcean, I was actually the vice president of the Azure Developer Experience Group in Microsoft's developer division. Sort of looking after application-centric services tools on Azure, compute services, platform services, developer tools, things like that. But really before that, I was the founder and chief technology officer of a startup I had started called Deus, which Microsoft acquired in 2017. So I've done kind of the startup thing myself. And I think one of the cool things about my time at Microsoft was I started the Azure Kubernetes service, which wound up being the fastest growing compute service in Azure's history. Before that, I was an early contributor to Docker and Kubernetes and founding member of the CNCF, things like that.
Fantastic. From exiting to Microsoft to having a record year at DigitalOcean. Earlier in March, you had a $775 million IPO. Just recently, we saw the Q3 results coming out. Again, very stellar growth. And key to that growth was product innovation was cited. So it's really good to talk to you. Gabe, what has changed, if anything at all, since DigitalOcean went public?
Well, that's a great question. Unfortunately, not one I can really answer because this is actually my fourth week at DigitalOcean. So, I'm really excited, to be a part of the transformation journey. And, I do have to say it's been really impressive to see how well, functioning and operating the company is and, really taking advantage of, I think, this unique opportunity we have to serve startups and SMBs in this market. But, I'll be able to, sort of share more about, what's behind the success as I get more deep into it.
Are you still mortified when you talk to potential customers and it's still a pen and paper operation and here you are telling them about the best in class technology? Does that mortify you?
I'm not really. Look, I think technology is an enabler, but at the end of the day, what really matters is building great products, for folks. And I think when you think about what's required to build high growth companies, some of the stuff that you do is highly technical in nature, and some of the stuff you do won't be. And I think that's part of the beauty of it.
So how is Southeast Asia as a region shaping up at DigitalOcean? Do you see it as one of your key, if not the biggest growth region?
Again, I'm pretty new to it. I can tell you, from my time just sort of looking at the industry in general, developers are exploding worldwide, right? And I think, there's been a lot of focus on sort of developer growth in, North America, obviously, in Western Europe, obviously. But I think, DigitalOcean has seen a lot of success around the globe. And that's something that I'm personally very interested in. I spent a lot of my time, traveling the world and meeting with developer communities everywhere, in really every geography on every continent. And I'm a big believer that the next wave of innovation is not going to be, centered in necessarily the same, spots as before. I think, we're looking at a new world now. The process of innovation, the process of building a company has been really democratized. And I believe that, every geography on the planet has a real shake at, building big, great, fast-growing businesses. And that's pretty exciting to see these days.
So we are seeing more businesses that are, in essence, born in the cloud, so to speak, right? As someone who's heavily involved in all these developer communities, what exactly are especially founders, entrepreneurs, and SMEs, small and medium enterprises, looking at when they go to market? What does their tech stack, or what should their tech stack comprise of?
Well, I'm a big believer that, you have to start with the easiest possible, tech stack and sort of the simplest possible solution, really minimize moving parts, because in the early days of the startup, the tech stack, like a lot of folks are worried, oh, is it going to scale? How fast, we're gonna have tons of users, but really finding product market fit and delighting customers is really way more important in the early days of a startup than having a tech stack that can scale, or one that uses all the latest buzzwords and technologies, even if that means you might be able to hire a little bit easier. And the thing is, something I've personally experienced is, if you're lucky enough to find success with your startup, you're likely going to have to rebuild your tech stack many times as you grow. And so, in some ways, it's like, get used to it, right? You'll get a little practice, starting with something simple and then scaling it up as you grow. Like if you over optimize on a tech stack that's, Kubernetes and all the other buzzwords, the risk is you might not actually get the learnings you need and really serve your customers well, because you'd be overly focused on the technology side versus on delighting customers. The good news, though, is, a company like DigitalOcean offers really everything that you need on that journey. So you can start with a $5 a month droplet, test out an idea, and then as you need to scale, you can move to something like a managed Kubernetes service where it is optimized, for startups and builders. But even that's only starting at $10 a month. And then as you need to complement your application with an array of managed databases or other add-on services, we've got that as well. So, but again, I think the real answer here is simplicity first.
On that note, what would you consider a typical purchaser for DigitalOcean? And one of the questions I like to ask is, what is the problem you solve for them, and what was their situation like before DigitalOcean, and what's the situation like after DigitalOcean?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in a lot of ways, folks who are coming to DigitalOcean are trying to, learn or validate an idea, and they want to make sure that the entry cost for that is low. I'll give you an example of this. I was working at a startup in New York City, and this is kind of like before cloud existed. I used to pay $500,000 in infrastructure costs just to try and validate an idea and get to product market fit. And in this case, in the end, the startup I was working at ultimately failed, and we wasted a whole lot of money in the process. Today, with cloud computing, you can test out an idea for very little cost. The economics have wildly changed. So you can spin up one of those $5 a month droplets and test out your idea. If you need to change course, you can spin it down. That kind of thing is hugely empowering for startups. And so, what I like to think is, this idea of being able to test, iterate rapidly, move and then scale. That's something that DigitalOcean offers, and that I think is pretty unique.
It's very interesting, right? So more and more, I used what were some of the key learnings from especially that failure that you mentioned? Of course, I'm sure it was one of the greatest life lessons learned, right? So what are some of the key lessons you learned there, and that you could bring to DigitalOcean or to future customers from DigitalOcean?
It's one really, really important lesson that I learned in startups, which is, you don't need to write code to test your idea out. in the beginning. Often it's better to start out with some mocks or some product experience outlines and go take those and test those out with customers. Because if the customers end up liking the outlines and demonstrate a willingness to pay, you can then proceed on building it on the engineering front with a level of confidence that, if you build it, your customers are going to be satisfied with it. All too often I see, startups, and this startup I was mentioning in particular, there was a lot of building, a lot of engineering going on, not a ton of, taking feedback from customers on the early designs. And, after a while of doing that, you can end up spending a lot of money and not getting the impact that you wanted. And there's one other bit too on that, which is customers, particularly customers of early stage startups, they love to be involved in the design stage, right? They love to be able to give feedback, and you're going to need those customers to be your evangelist and help you sell on your journey. You're going to need their case studies, and so don't be afraid to bring them along the ride, right? Don't be afraid to share that you maybe don't have everything figured out and you need their help in lining up pricing or whatever it may be. That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned.
So it's really those early adopters, bringing them along with the more mass market profile to then go to market. Interesting. One of the conversations we frequently have in at least Southeast Asia, but I'm sure it's a global problem, is there's a major talent crunch for developer talent. I'm sure this is a conversation you have or you've seen. What is the situation like globally? Is there anything that you can share with us?
Yeah, it is no different in the markets where DigitalOcean is hiring, which tend to be across the globe. We are. I think one of the cool things about DigitalOcean is it's a remote first company. It was actually a remote first company well before I joined, and even well before the pandemic, where 60% of the company was operating remotely. And I think as DigitalOcean proceeded through the pandemic, because the company was remote first, it had this ability to sort of accelerate out the other side, because a lot of the practices around how you run remote teams has really helped us on a lot of levels. Recruiting and with talent has been one of those areas where employees are looking for flexibility today, right? They're looking for the ability to work from home, to be able to travel, to be closer to family, and I think that's really critical. And so we're seeing, and certainly I'm seeing, lots of remote friendliness questions being asked by employees who really are starting to hold the upper hand in a lot of these conversations today, because there is a skill shortage, particularly with developers, right? There is a developer skill shortage, and they are in high demand today.
Some of the anecdotes we hear, right? So it's so competitive in Southeast Asia that even for a scale up, you're competing with the likes of NASA that's trying to get developer talent in the region, and correspondingly, it's been quite the pay packages and everything have risen significantly. But that's interesting. So with remote work being the norm, do you see it further evolving? What would that evolution look like?
Well, I'm a big believer that remote work is critical, and I actually think that companies are going to have to sink or swim on this, right? There's going to be a set of companies who are going to figure out how to embrace remote work fully and completely, and the ones who do that are going to be very successful. The companies who hold on to this idea of everyone has to be in the office every week and 2 to 3 days in the office every week, my belief is that those companies are going to really struggle to acquire talent, and struggle just to compete. And so that's something I'm looking out for, and we'll see. And I am optimistic that companies like DigitalOcean, companies like GitLab, and others who have really made that true remote first push are helping lead the way and helping teach others, because a lot of us are still learning about this, right? Like there is no set of answers that are well understood and well accepted by everyone on how to build a remote first company. And so I think part of this is just being humble and making sure that we're listening to our employee base, and not assuming that we have all the answers.
Fantastic. Just wanted to pause here and a reminder for those of you who are tuning in to please, if you have questions, we would love to hear from you. We have a platform, Hubilo. Do leave your questions, and if time permits, we look forward to hopefully answering some of it. Gabe, tell us, what are some of your pet peeves or jargons that really grind your gear? And pardon my use of.
Oh, pet peeves. Let's see. 3-letter acronyms, TLAs, as the phrase goes. When we talk in a company, and I was certainly guilty of this at Microsoft, and DigitalOcean has a set of acronyms. I think it's important that people define the acronym, like the full version of the acronym, anytime they use it, because especially in a world where people are changing companies rapidly, not everyone understands what these acronyms mean. And so one of the things I'm pretty pointy with my team about is making sure that we're explaining those acronyms and making sure that we're helping educate and bring people along. So that's just one of them. On the tech side, I would say one of my pet peeves is when you have cloud service providers that are offering a wild array of products that can all kind of do the same thing and are really failing to provide guidance to end users and to developers on why they would use one service or another. Like, I think there's 20 different ways to run containers, right? That really, is a pet peeve of mine. I think customers deserve better than that. And that's something that I think at DigitalOcean, we aspire to do a bit better on.
Fantastic. Part of a lot of the governments in this part of the world, they're starting to inculcate coding being taught early on in schools, for example. What exactly should some of these digital roadmaps that they're pushing from top down, what are some of the things you feel they should include?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Well, first, I have to say, I think it's great that governments are thinking about how can we educate folks on coding and these skill sets. I think that's really important. I think being able to be literate in code is a skill that not everyone is going to have, but it's becoming increasingly important. And I did not have that available to me, and I think I was fortunate to be able to figure out how to learn that stuff on my own. I do think that there's a lot to learn also about the process of building products. And I think the process of building products and taking feedback on that and building excellent experiences for customers, it's related to technology, it's related to coding. But this idea of excellence in building products is something that I think would be it'd be great for folks to understand, what the moving parts are of that process at a younger age.
Okay. What do you see as some of the biggest trends on the horizon for the cloud industry in say the next 1 year, the next 5 years, and the next 10 years?
Well, I think in the next year or so, I think there's a lot of just low-hanging fruit, right? Just a lot of folks who are have ideas in the hopper and they want to figure out how to get them into cloud. And I think I'm not expecting all that much to change in terms of dramatic change over the next year. But when you think out a little bit, you think about some of the bigger trends. The thing that I'm really focused on is, it's estimated that there's going to be 44 million new developers that are going to enter the market by the year 2030. And you think about who are these folks, right? So these are young people, students, startups, entrepreneurs. And these 44 million developers, they're bringing with them a wave of innovation across the globe. And they have more power collectively than ever before. And yet one of the things I see is that the big cloud companies are still really focused on enterprises and on enterprise revenue. And I think that's going to come to a head. I believe it will. I think companies like DigitalOcean, who are catering exclusively to this new class of developers, they understand the challenges these developers are facing. They understand, what it takes to build a startup. They understand, that these developers don't want to be faced with 20 different ways to run a container and things like that. And because of that, I think companies like DigitalOcean make much better partners, for developers on their journey to the cloud.
That is quite a soundbite. 44 million new developers by 2023. That's the size of some ASEAN countries.
Sorry, 2030, by 2030.
That's the size of some ASEAN countries, the entire population. Which part of the world do you see a lot of these developer talents coming from, and how much of it would you attribute to, say, Southeast Asia?
I'd have to look into the data. These are IDC figures that I'm quoting, but I would guess that a lot of this is going to correspond to population growth overall, right? Because the skilling, for who can be a developer, the access to those training curriculums, that's available everywhere worldwide, right? And when you look at Southeast Asia or anywhere else around the globe, the populations there are growing. The access to the stuff is growing, and I would expect that a lot of that 44 million new developers is not just going to be coming from, the parts of the United States of America or the Bay Area, parts that you might traditionally associate, with innovation in the space.
Just one more reminder, perhaps a last call for questions to our audience. If you have questions, do speak your mind, do share your questions. We'd love to hear from you. Gabe, can you tell us, so you've been in many different professional environments, including a company that's acquired by Microsoft. What's so special or different about DigitalOcean that excites you?
Oh, there's many things about it. One is the focus on community. I think software building is a team sport, right? Yeah, it's just something where there's lots of different people involved in it, and DigitalOcean really understands the value of community, right? Whether it is investments in tutorials and education materials, which I think are probably inarguably best of class, right? The DigitalOcean tutorial set is educating thousands, maybe millions of developers on how to do build basic stuff, and those tutorials are helping teach people how to ultimately get to a place where they can build a company or a tech company or a startup or something like that. And I think that's incredibly powerful to understand that model of community and education sort of grounding community. Another one is open source. I have had a front row seat to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and this idea that you can have companies, different companies working together on a common code base, and I really believe that this open source allows for software projects to scale beyond the confines of one company. So you can have, Google, DigitalOcean, Microsoft, Amazon, whoever, all collaborating on a code base, like say Kubernetes. And that kind of thing wasn't possible before. And DigitalOcean really understands that value of community. But probably the biggest thing is the value of love. At DigitalOcean, we have this value of love, and it comes across in everything we do, from how we think about customer interactions, to how we design experiences, to how we engage with the outside world and with other communities. And that's something that I found incredibly powerful, and I think it's a real great value to have in a company. Love at its core.
Could you just, for us to visualize this value of community and love, can you tell us a few examples to help us to really visualize life at DigitalOcean?
Yeah, well, I think on the community side, right, it's a lot of work in sort of reaching out to this community of next generation of developers, right? We have a deploy conference at DigitalOcean that's coming up, where you get to see a lot of this community and a lot of this love on full display. I'd argue that's probably the best place to see that. But there's lots of other things too that are going on. I think I like to think about what I see inside of the teams, right? One of the fun things I get to do early in DigitalOcean is work with the engineering teams, and really getting to see how love for our customers is shining through everything we do, whether we're talking about a bug or a feature that we're working on. We're really talking about how we can serve customers, and that sort of customer-centric mindset is shining through every single thing we do: product, engineering, design, research, all of it. And so that's really exciting to see.
That's great to hear. Let's take a step back to an industry level. What is one unpopular truth about your industry that you can tell us?
Unpopular truth about the industry. I think I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again because I think it's so important. I think this idea that the big cloud companies are really exceedingly focused on enterprises and this idea of enterprise revenue. And look, it makes sense, right? Digital transformation of enterprises is hugely important, right? And I've it's been my job for a while too, and I can see how hard it is. And what the stakes are, how high the stakes are for companies who need to, maybe they were an enterprise, but they need to move into this API first kind of developer oriented world where they can move fast and innovate. And that's that's important. And these, big cloud companies, they need to be helping enterprises on that journey. But what that's leaving as a remainder is the 44 million new developers that I talked about who are going to be entering the market by 2030. Who's the champion for them? Who's looking after them? And I think companies like DigitalOcean are really laser focused on that. And I think that is something that, it is just sort of a reality, right? The dynamics around enterprise and digital transformation, they're not changing anytime soon. And I think that is, for better or worse, the reality we face today.
Fantastic. I think we are approaching towards the end. Gabe, is there anything else you would like to say or share with the audience?
I guess I just say that I am extremely optimistic and excited to see what kind of innovation folks in Southeast Asia and really beyond are going to deliver over the next few years, right? I believe that this innovation, this ability to build high growth, technology-oriented startups, there's no reason why that has to happen in the SF Bay area or in New York City or in some of the places that it's traditionally associated with. And I'm really looking forward to seeing some of the companies that are going to grow and scale, hopefully on DigitalOcean, of course. But I'm really looking forward to the innovation that everyone's going to bring, and I look forward to talking with all of you and listening to your journey.
Fantastic. To just quickly recap some of the sound bites from you, Gabe, I thought it was a very fascinating session, right? 44 new developers by 2030. And, it's not just going to be in the Bay Area. I think that is very interesting. So if it's already not part of your company's journey, there's more to the world than enterprise. That's not your only cash cow. That's not the only sweet spot. This other concept of value of community, value of love, it really shows how DigitalOcean thinks of not just their own people, but their customers. That's the first time I've heard the word love and customers almost. Sometimes it's a bit conflicting, but in this case, it was fantastic to hear. So thank you, Gabe, for all the insights, and we hope you had a wonderful time with us. For the listeners, thank you.
Thank you.